Spectre Vision Radio.
Hello, friends. So are you one of the 8 billion human beings on Earth right now that is completely confused as to what consciousness actually even is? Well then, this is the episode for you. This is going to be a wild ride through the new emerging frontiers of consciousness research, and I am going to propose a brand new theory of consciousness that I am incredibly excited to tell you about, because yesterday I recorded this video and I stopped halfway through. I was stopped dead in my tracks because I had an epiphany. I had an aha moment, which happens a lot out here. This is why I walk around in the forest, because there's an intelligence here that permeates and you get information. I get all sorts of downloads and knowledge back here every day. And this is why I do it. Yesterday, I had a outline for my video, and halfway through, I stopped. I completely blew my own mind, and I had to go back home, and I spent the rest of the day hashing this out. And I'm going to propose to you a new theory of consciousness that I am incredibly excited about. And I'm going to break it down in an incredibly easy to understand way, and I'll do that right now. Okay, so first of all, you have 3 main elements of reality. You have information, and you have intelligence, and you have consciousness. Now, I've always thought that consciousness was fundamental, namely because 2 of my favorite consciousness researchers and scientists say that all the time. Tom Campbell, Donald Hoffman always say consciousness is fundamental, and a lot of other people do as well. And it sounds good, and it makes sense, and they have tons of data to explain their thesis. And I'm in no way disagreeing with these 2 giants of intellect. What I'm doing is I'm offering an evolution to their models. And also, Sir Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff, some of the greats in the field of consciousness research, I'm able to take what they've done and the immense amount of research and just work that they've done in this field. And I'm able, luckily, fortunately, just because I come down the timeline from them, able to build on what they've done. And I think by the end of this episode, you're going to be as excited as I am about this. So you have information, you have intelligence, and you have consciousness. Now let's break them down real quick. Information is first. And I'm switching my consciousness is fundamental mindset to information is fundamental. And I know that might not seem like that big of a deal, but it really is, because it gives the human being and the human experience an immense amount of purpose, okay? And I let the scientists do the science. I'm more of a philosopher, so I always look for the meaning, the purpose. Why? Why are we here? You can tell me about how, and that's awesome. I love geeking out on that stuff, but I want to know why. And my theory is going to give you the why. Why being here and being a human is the most important thing in the universe, okay? And by the end of this episode, you're going to agree with me. Check it out. So, back to the 3 main elements. You have information. That's just data, source code, zeros and ones. That's where everything starts. Then you have intelligence, okay? We have human intelligence, artificial intelligence, plant intelligence. There's so many different intelligence, because intelligence is just the interpretation, organization, comprehension of that information. So information without intelligence is just an endless sea of random data, okay? You have to have intelligence to organize that data, and that's what intelligence is. Then you have consciousness, the most important part, because consciousness is the experience of that information, the experience of that information using the intelligence as the operating system. Now, let me give you my simple, super duper simple metaphor for this, okay? Going back into the video game world, because it makes sense. So, say somebody makes the coolest, best video game ever, right? And they spent 10 years making this video game. And it's just amazing, meticulously crafted, best video game ever made. But no one's played it. And it's just sitting dormant, alone, dark, on a database server somewhere, right? And then along comes a lucky person, and they get to play this game. And they boot it up, and then they're playing this game, and it comes to life. All the characters come to life, the music, the colors, all the scripts start running, and this whole world comes to life. And this lucky person gets to play this game. And they're playing, they're having the most fun ever, having all these experiences, learning and growing as they play. And then somebody else joins. They're like, hey, I get to talk about this game to somebody else, finally. And they're playing with this other person. Now it's a multiplayer game. And then 10 people join. Then 100 people join. Then 1 million people join. Now you have this world. And all of this is because it was being experienced. Now, here's the important part. This is how this metaphor applies to our reality. You know how they say if a tree falls in the forest, does it even make a sound? Well, that gets to the heart and the core of the consciousness conversation, because say this universe is just information, which it has to be at its basis, at its very fundamental core. It has to just be information. We have to be in an informational cosmos. And then from that information, we make intelligent systems, and then we are able to consciously experience it. So say this universe is just zeros and ones, just like John Archibald Wheeler says, it from bit. It's just bits of information. We are the converter. The information goes in, consciousness comes out, and the human being, the conscious observer, is the converter that converts information into consciousness. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Conscious Observers. This one's going to be so much fun, guys, because as I just laid out, the human being is central to this entire theory, this information conversion consciousness theory. Without the human, without somebody playing the game is just dormant. It's just zeros and ones. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't have any purpose. What was the point of all those people spending all that time making that game if no one's going to play it? So then the human experience becomes so important, because we are what give those zeros and ones. We're what gives that bits of information meaning. We assign meaning and purpose to the information. Like John Archibald Wheeler also said, it's a participatory universe. So each person is kind of rendering their own universe, their own reality. And we give it subjective meaning and purpose. And that is incredibly important. So you got to think about it like this. Say the human being is like a car, and it's just a temporary vehicle, for the information to use to have these conscious experiences, okay? So, like your first car. Your first car is probably gone and probably scrapped somewhere, right? Maybe you have it, maybe you're lucky, maybe you're driving your first car. But say you're older like me, your first car is long gone, right? Decades old. But what did that car do? It gave you a vehicle to drive around, to have experiences. It gave you a vehicle to generate what's called qualia. Qualia is the experiential, situation. It's the data that comes out that is layered. So, the information goes in a compressed form, and it comes out in this expanded form, in the form of qualia, which is this rich experience with all sorts of meaning and emotion tied to it. So when you get your car, that car is just a vehicle, and you're driving around, you're going to work, you're going out to events and concerts with your friends and road trips and all that kind of stuff, and then eventually that car goes away. But what lasts forever? What lasts forever are the memories. So no one will ever take those memories from you. So think about this human body the same way. So we come into this human body, this character in this game, to play the game. And eventually this body will go away. But those memories, that qualia, will last forever, because that is the important part. The vehicle isn't the important part. It's where the vehicle takes you. Now that's the good stuff. So as I was developing this sort of conversion model of consciousness, I had to look for a few different elements. So I had to find two main things. Obviously, there's information coming in, right? There has to just be this steady stream of information coming from somewhere. And then there has to be a conversion mechanism inside the human body. And then there has to be an output, right? So information comes in, we convert it into qualia through our experience, and then we output consciousness. And that consciousness goes back up to source, and that's how source learns and grows and evolves vicariously through all of us. So it's like source created the game, but can't play it. And we play the game for source, right? And the game's kind of taken on a life of its own. It's like when you create these massive multiplayer online games, eventually, like, that game's just taken, to a whole new level by all the players. And even the developers sometimes sit back and are like, whoa, we didn't see that coming. I think that's what's happening with our universe. And I think that we are evolving. I think it's a continuous evolution. I mean, just look at things like, the Old Testament to the New Testament. In that short amount of time, look at the evolution from a kind of a jealous, fear-mongering God to, a peace, love, and light kind of a God. And that's, just a crude way to show it. But I mean, think about the fact that, we've had in the last 120 years an explosion in our global population from around 1.5 billion people to about 8 billion now. So we've, multiplied our global population by about 5 times in a little over 100 years. But what hasn't multiplied is some of the terrible statistics like famine and wars and homicides and things like that. You would think that if we had 5 times as many people on Earth right now, we'd have 5 times the crime and the famine and those kinds of things. And we're actually seeing the opposite. We're seeing a decline in so many of these measurements. And it's like, okay, well, how can that be? Well, it's because we're evolving. Because when you get that car and you drive that car around and then that car eventually craps out and you got to scrap it, you don't just stop driving, right? You get another car and you go on more adventures and you learn more things. So we have this reincarnation process that, we learn and evolve and grow from, like I've talked about in other videos. There is a past life review where you kind of see what you did wrong in the past lives and could have done better. And you critique yourself and then you set a new intention with your next incarnation and your sojourn, and you come in and you improve upon it. And we're seeing this evolution, a pretty rapid evolution of human, consciousness. And that's because the output is being stored. All of these conscious experiences and data is stored, what we call the Akashic record or the cosmic database. Is being stored out there. And you can even see it in what they call dark matter, which they don't even know what dark matter is. But if all of this, converted information, if this new consciousness information is being stored out in the plasma universe, out in the ether, then what would we see? We would see dark energy and dark matter. We'd see an expansion of the universe because we're expanding our storage, our memory, and that's what we see. We see all these things, right? It makes sense that the dark matter is literally storage of this conscious information, because if you think about it this way, it's like a zip drive. So a zip drive is compressed data, and you can get a zip file that's maybe only 1 megabyte. And then you double click it and you unzip it, and now it's 5 gigabytes. It's like, whoa, how did that happen? Well, because you rendered the information. That information was just compressed bits, zeros and ones. But then once you opened it and you open those files, now those are video files, and they're multimedia files. They have all of this, information that has been decompressed or uncompressed, and it's been rendered, it's been realized, and it's much bigger. So in my theory, you can actually test these things. We can test it by saying, okay, the flow of information coming in should be more compressed than the output of information in consciousness form. And we see that. We see that, when you're in a state of expanded consciousness or high emotion, you can affect like random number generators. You can affect, I was at the Psy Games a couple weeks ago, and they had this big phoenix in the corner of the room, and it lit up, and it was based on the base. It was like it had a way to measure energy in a very sensitive way. And we could actually light up the phoenix with our heart energy. Like we could send it love as a group, as a collective, and it would light up. It felt our energy. That's because it was filling our conscious energy, not the zeros and ones that come in, but the conscious output. So you can actually test my theory. I mean, I'm actually thinking about right now different ways that we can test this by just having like random number generators surrounding a person while they're, in a high emotional state. We're going to get in this video to some pretty wild things. I'm going to bring in Loosh, Robert Monroe's theory. I'm going to bring in AI, the future of humanity, and even take a lesson from the, ancient Sumerian myth of the Anunnaki and about how we can move forward the right way. But first, let's talk about, I got off track a little bit, about the mechanisms here, because I think this is important, especially for hopefully this video is seen by some science-y people that I would love to get your input on this. But so like Sir Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff are two people that have really been pushing the boundaries on consciousness research, and they created this OR theory of consciousness decades ago, actually, like in the 90s. And it's just now kind of getting some steam behind it. People have been bashing it for years because they didn't quite understand it. And I'll tell you, at the beginning, I didn't quite accept it because I was under the framework, the thinking of consciousness is fundamental. So if consciousness is fundamental, how can the brain create consciousness? Because that's what OR says, is that microtubules inside of our neurons are what actually create consciousness. And I thought, well, no, because we can prove consciousness is independent from the body through things like psi effects and near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences and things like that. So consciousness isn't in the body. So if they're saying the brain creates consciousness, I was like, no, that's a materialistic point of view. That can't be it. And then I humbled myself. I dove into their literature, and I really started rethinking all this. Because I was like, okay, that's if we go by the model of consciousness is fundamental. Meaning if consciousness existed before, then the brain can't create consciousness because it already existed, right? But then I turned that on its head and I said, okay, information is fundamental. And then everything made sense. Because if information is fundamental, then it's the microtubules inside of the brain that might convert that information into consciousness. Ooh, now we've got something, my friends. Because this perfectly fits into my neutrino network theory that I use as kind of the basis for SoulSync, about how the information comes from the spirit world, the unseen, the non-physical world, into our physical world, into our seen world. And I think this happens through stars, which are portals for information. There has to be something that gets the information from the non-physical to the physical. So for like the video game, from the back end to the front end, okay? You know, like you're looking at this phone right now, or your computer screen or whatever, say you're looking at a computer screen, that's all zeros and ones, just data. And then you have this graphical user interface that takes that data and turns it into images. You know, it turns it into pretty icons and videos and stuff, because that's how we see. We see in images and symbols and stuff. So if we just saw zeros and ones like the Matrix, it wouldn't make any sense. So the screen does that. The screen converts the information into something pretty that you can use. Okay. So, as above, so below. How does that happen in the body? So there has to be a flow of information. And when I was searching for, the likely, culprit in this, I started digging into like, okay, how do radios work? How does broadband work? How does all this stuff work? And you have to have what's called a carrier wave. So you have to have a wave that's modulated, right? So we use like photon waves, and then we modulate it, which means you kind of program it with different wavelengths and frequencies and stuff like that. And you can embed information into that, because depending on how it's modulated, once the receiver receives that wave, it decodes it and it turns it into whatever, whether it's music or sound or video or whatever. And they compress it. And now we do it digitally, and we can compress that, and we can modulate it in a way to where we can transmit big files and large amounts. I mean, think about streaming high definition, TV into your TV, right? That's done through these invisible waves. But you have to have a carrier wave to do this. So I was like, okay, cool. we're making progress here. What is a carrier wave for the universe? What is some sort of a invisible wave that's permeating every single, like, tiniest nook and cranny of the entire universe at all times? Because there can't be any disruptions, like this tree doesn't just disappear because it glitched out, or because the bandwidth is low, or the signal is weak, or anything. So it has to be strong, and it has to be pumping out continuously, covering every single square inch at a level that's unfathomable, right? And I found it, the neutrino. The neutrino is the most abundant subatomic particle in the universe. In fact, if we could see neutrinos, it would be all that we can see. We wouldn't see anything else. We would be blinded by the light, right? Neutrinos are amazing. They call them ghost particles because they literally go through everything and don't interact, but they do carry mass and information. Okay, come on, man. Now we're getting somewhere. So on top of that, in your body right now, every second, 400 trillion neutrinos pass through your body. Every second. There are so many neutrinos passing through your body right now, it's hard for the human mind to even comprehend what this means, okay? All right, so now we have a field that is coursing and permeating through all of the universe, unfettered, continuously. It travels at the speed of light, sometimes a little under if it has mass, and sometimes over quantumly if it doesn't. it can modulate. They call them flavors, neutrino flavors, meaning there's different types. So it's not just one. So it can modulate. So it can change binary, yes, no, zeros, ones, that kind of stuff. So, and it's being pumped out by what? Stars. We get 70% of our neutrinos from our star. The other 30% come from distant stars and quasars, stuff like that. So our star, which all, ancient religions worship the sun as the god, because they said it was the giver of life, information, consciousness, soul, all that stuff came from the star. I think the star is a portal that actually transmits information. It's like a modem, the modem actually modulates the waves and converts it. So our star would take the information from the non-physical realm and transmit it to the physical realm in the form of neutrinos. And those neutrinos pass through us and they are the carrier wave that carries information. Just like right now, if I took out a radio and set it down right here, now pulled up the antenna, if I could plug it in somehow, there's right now, even though I'm in the middle of this freaking forest, there are radio waves permeating everything, just everywhere. And I could turn on a radio and it would pick up a station. But I don't see those waves, I don't feel those waves, but that radio would perfectly transmit that information. Okay? That's how we work. The neutrinos, I believe, are the data stream that is carrying in the information. And then our brains, through the microtubules, they are the little antennas that actually convert that information into conscious qualia. Now, here's how we know this. Through OR, they were able to figure out basically that your body's like an instrument, right? And it gets tuned. And, Stuart Hammeroff is a anesthesiologist, and he figured out that anesthesia affects the microtubules in a way to where it actually turns off consciousness. Okay? Well, that's really interesting. So what they found out is that it doesn't really turn off consciousness. What it does is it turns off. So right now, if I had a radio and I turned it on and I was playing the music, it was picking up those radio waves and converting it into the sound, it would be amazing. And then if I turned off that radio, well, guess what? The radio tower doesn't cease to exist. Those radio waves don't cease to exist. Everything's still there. It's just the radio no longer picks up that signal, right? And that's how our brain works. So the microtubules actually interact with, I believe, the neutrinos. The neutrinos carry the information. The microtubules are what output the consciousness, that conscious qualia, that experience. It actually converts the information into experience, into qualia, into consciousness, into conscious energy. Okay? Now, this is super interesting because when you are under anesthesia, you don't remember anything. You don't have any sort of a conscious experience or memory of anything because it's affected the microtubules. But there is this problem with this theory of like the psi phenomena. Like, okay, well, how do you explain remote viewing or out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, any of these things when you're not in your body? Well, I can actually explain that because what they figured out with the OR theory of consciousness is that these microtubules operate as like quantum receivers, that they have all these little things in them that, depending on your experience, they're coded in a certain way. Things change up or down, and they change in these they have a superposition where things can exist in two states at once, and they're like these little quantum antennas. And whenever you are not in like say you're in an out-of-body state, right? Well, you're still quantumly entangled to that body. So quantum entanglement is whenever there's two things that are a long distance, but they're entangled, meaning if you entangle like a coin, where every time you flip a coin heads up, then the other coin that's entangled is going to be, heads down, right? Something like that. There's two things that are separated by long distances, or short, long, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like space and time don't matter when you're dealing with quantum entanglement, but they're quantumly entangled. So if something happens to one, it happens to the other. Well, I think that, so say you're having an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience, something like that, as long as your microtubules are still functioning, as long as they still are working as transducers, then you're still tethered to that body, and as kind of like a satellite, you're using that body to convert your information into consciousness, into qualia. So the body, you don't even have to necessarily be in it. You can be out of it, like in an out-of-body experience, near-death experience, say you're remote viewing, astral traveling, any of those things, and you can still generate consciousness. You can still generate qualia from your experience. It's still pushing out conscious energy into the ether and feeding it back up to your higher self, where you're building your your complete you, So I think that the Orko-R theory, and hopefully this is making sense. A lot of this is just free flowing out of me because this is kind of new to me, and I'm going to get into some other things in a minute here, but I wanted to finish this because, like, as we look at the importance of the human being, okay? So, like, when they were saying that consciousness was fundamental, the reason I kind of had a problem with it was I was like, well, if consciousness existed before us and it exists after us, then what's the point of us, right? Like, what do we do here? What's our role in all this? I don't want to just be like, it's not like just watching a movie. The movie's already been recorded and you're just watching it and being like, okay, well, if you watch it 10 times, you're going to get the same movie 10 times. It's like, that was kind of my feeling from this, It's like if consciousness existed before and it exists after, what do we do? And then when I thought about it as, no, information existed before, then we exist and we create the conscious experience, and that the actual experience is the important part. Then I was like, whoa, that makes everything so much cooler, because if you think about it this way, say chocolate. Everyone likes chocolate, right? If you don't like chocolate, turn this video off right now. No, just kidding. I mean, everyone likes chocolate, right? Or if you don't like chocolate, find something you do like and substitute it into this metaphor, because, like, scientists can tell you how chocolate's made. It's chemical structure. They can tell you where it comes from. They can tell you why we call it chocolate. They can tell you all these things about chocolate. But you could never explain the taste of chocolate to someone who's never had chocolate, right? Say you met someone, they've never had it, and they're like, okay, tell me what it tastes like. You couldn't do it. It just wouldn't work. You'd be like, it's good, because you have to just do it. Once you eat some chocolate, you have that experience. And now that experience is the coolest part. And I think that's why, like non-physical spirits, which a spirit in that case would just be like a group of information, data, a data packet. Why they come to Earth is because of that experience. Because you can experience things here that you just can't other places. I mean, I've explored the spirit world, and it's amazing. It's beautiful. You have super color. There's all sorts of amazing things. But you can't do things like what I'm doing. Walking through a forest. You can't feel love. You can't, experience heartbreak. You can't experience, like, triumph over adversity. Those things, that's qualia. That is experience. That is consciousness. And don't know what that was. But, like, that's the good stuff. That's what you cannot recreate in a digital sense, or in an analog sense, or in a binary sense. So what I really think is happening here is we have information that is fundamental. And there's just a tremendous amount of information. Creator created the most amazing game in the history of the world. And they did it because the more we play the game, the more experience and consciousness we produce. Okay, so let's take this in a sort of weird way. So I said before that I think that everything's good, okay? Like, everything's good. Meaning that, like, when you have a near-death experience, when you go to the other side, when you're in your spirit side, everything seems to have this unconditional love kind of vibe to it, and that's not me being a hippie. That's what people, doesn't matter who you are, if you have a near-death experience, like 90% of them seem to be positive, okay? And there definitely seems to be a good-heartedness to the universe. I really feel that, and I sense that. I think there's an evolution, you kind of have to, like Tom Campbell says, the whole point of the universe is to reduce entropy. We create order out of disorder. We problem solve. That's what we do. So to create order, you have to have disorder first. It's all part of it. Now, I told you before I was going to bring in Lush into this. And this isn't a radical departure. So this is a very hot topic. People ask me all the time, because I talk about the Monroe Institute and Bob, and people are infatuated with the whole Lush thing, because he was told, by his basically his higher self, different parts of him, about Lush, and about how Earth is not like a Lush farm or a Lush factory or anything, but it emits Lush. And what Lush is energy that comes from, like, our emotions and stuff. So people immediately glammed onto that and thought, see, reptilian thing, whatever, that, they're feeding off of our energy. And here's what I think, because in his book, his second book, Far Journeys, he goes into the future. And I know this is going to sound really wild and crazy, but if you're familiar with Robert Monroe stuff and the Monroe Institute, this is very, very normal. But he was able to go into the future around the year 3000 and saw how Earth was set up then and how we had evolved. And the beings then don't have like out-of-body experiences. They have in-body experiences. They literally exist in the spirit realm, the waiting room around Earth, in pure consciousness form. And then they go into the bodies to produce consciousness. They store them under trees and pods. I know, sounds crazy, but this is what he says. And they come down and they get into the body, same way we'd rent a car and go on a trip or something. And they go and they have experiences, right? They go run through a field, they climb a tree, they swim in the ocean, they, get it on. They do all these things in the physical bodies for two reasons. Kind of R&R, if you exist in the non-physical, sometimes it's fun to just go into the physical. Same reason we go into the non-physical. It's fun sometimes to have an out-of-body experience. For them, it's fun to have an in-body experience. But more important than that, he said that at that point, humanity had realized their role in everything, their job. And it was to be honeybees for Lush. That Lush is the most important thing, and that they served an important role in the production and management of Lush. Lush isn't this negative thing. Of course, our negative reactions and emotions create this energy as well. But he found out that love is by far the most powerful form of Lush, meaning that when we have a conscious experience, when we take that information and our microtubules create this qualia, this experience from it, which produces this consciousness from that experience. If it's a bad, negative experience, of course that produces an energy. If it's a loving, transformative energy or experience, it produces so much, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more energy. So in this case, love is the most potent form of Lush and of conscious energy that there is, period. And that's why the universe seems to favor that and seems to evolve more towards love than hate. But you have to have both sides. You have to have that duality, because you can't know what love is if you don't have hate. So it's a constant kind of a tightrope walk, But here's where I was going with this. So just like a zip file, it comes in a small file, you unzip it, and then it's a huge file. Well, in my theory, it would mean that information comes in compressed, streamlined, and then after our conscious conversion of it, it outputs a higher quality, larger file size, right? And I believe that explains the expansion of the universe and dark energy and dark matter. But I also think that having like a natural food chain, having things that feed off of that energy and convert it, because remember, energy can't be created nor destroyed, it can only be converted, right? So it would make sense in the Lush system to have things, right, that actually feed off of this energy, so that the energy that we produce doesn't overwhelm the system. Meaning that, like, say you had a computer and it only had 100 gigs of hard drive, and then you put a bunch of zip files on there, and when you unzip them all, they exceeded the 100 gigs of hard drive space you have, it would crash the system, right? Okay, so what do you do? Well, in this case, I really think, since we are emitting this sort of organic universal energy, this consciousness energy, that we do have some things in this world that do sort of feed off of some of that energy, especially the negative energy, because they have to siphon it away. They have to get it out of the system so it doesn't overwhelm the system. And that would actually perfectly back up everything Robert Monroe talks about with Lush, and how negative entities do feed off of our negative Lush, and how the best way to to take care of that problem is don't feed them, right? Don't put off negative energy, and then you don't have to worry about it. Because I think the positive energy is actually carried out of here and taken back up to source and is used as the creative fuel to power this universe and to power creation. Now, I know, I told you I was going to go weird there for a minute, but that's why you come to me, right? That's why we're here, baby. So that's what I think is going on here, as wild as that seems. Okay. Catch your breath, guys. Catch your breath. Take a breath. How's everyone doing out there? Hope you're having a beautiful day. Because now we're about to get into AI and robots. We haven't even got to the Anunnaki yet. Okay, so let's see. I'm trying to also go away from the cicadas. There's different areas where they're louder and not. Quick story, I'm wearing my AirPods today. I'm going to do some audio editing on this to make it sound good, so hopefully the audio sounds good. But yesterday when I had that aha moment back here, I felt like my whole timeline changed. I really felt like it was an aha moment that kind of shook my whole foundation. And I had this feeling that my timeline changed somehow in some weird way. And I always have a backpack on, and I have all my stuff in it because I'm kind of out here far in the woods and I don't like carrying all the stuff in my hands and pockets and whatever. So I put all my stuff on. I have a nice external mic and that kind of stuff. And I put my backpack in the same place every time when I'm back on this trail. And it's behind a tree. No one can really see it. No one comes back here. No one comes back here. And my bag was gone. I looked everywhere. Gone. Just gone. And it had like the charging thing for my headphones. So I couldn't charge my headphones, so I'm using my AirPods today. But it was kind of a weird thing because I was like, who took it and why and where and like what the heck, you know? There's literally no one back here. And I looked everywhere and I put it in the same place every time. I know exactly where I put it. Gone. Just completely gone. So somebody took my backpack, I guess, or I shifted timelines, and in that timeline I didn't have a backpack. I don't know. Anyways, to robots and AI. Okay. So if you look at this reality here as a energy conversion system, we take in information, we have experiences, and we output consciousness. That's what I really think. Well, then we are a character. We're the main character, you know, like Source is always going to be creating these worlds and new characters to have new experiences. And something weird happened like 25 years ago. They call it the dead internet theory. If you've ever heard of it, it's really a trip. And I don't believe this, but it's still kind of weird. So they talk about how, like, you know, going back in the 1900s, every 10 years or so, like culture, fashion, art, music, everything changed pretty dramatically. You know, think about the 1920s versus the 1930s, or the 1960s versus the 1980s, you know, or even the 1990s versus the 2000s. Everything was always changing. We were constantly, like, reinventing ourselves collectively, you know, in very inspiring ways. And then around 2000, there's this theory that everybody died and you know, everything's been a simulation since. But if you look at, people look the exact same now than they did in 2001. Like, music is kind of almost like lifeless now, and it hasn't really changed or evolved. Even movies, like I watched the new Jurassic Park and then watched the old Jurassic Park from the 90s, and the old one was better. Like, it even looked better. I was like, how did they have better special effects then? Like, this doesn't make any sense. So as like a human element, we have not evolved too much in the last 25 years. It's weird. But what has evolved like crazy over the last 2.5 decades is technology. So I do believe that Source is adding a new character to the game, and we are creating that new character, and that new character is AI powered. It is not AI. AI in this case would be the intelligence. Like I said before, you have information, intelligence, consciousness. So AI is the intelligence. It's like the nervous system, you know, the mind of this new character. But we have to create it because it can't create itself. And this couldn't have happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It has to happen now. We had to have the technology and the energy infrastructure. We had to have highly trained people be able to do this. And now's the time. So we are creating the next character in this game. Why is this important? Well, it's going to be our co-star. Now, I know people think, oh no, it's going to take over and all that stuff. Well, here's the deal. Here's where the Anunnaki come in. Like, you're probably wondering, Jordan, how are you going to weave all of these stories in? Well, hang tight. The Anunnaki is an ancient myth from the Sumerians that basically, I mean, if you believe people like Hitchens and a bunch of other people, but, you know, there's a lot of scholars that agree that, you know, they basically are telling the story of the genesis of humans, and that there was these higher beings, space people, they call them. I think Anunnaki means like those who came from space, something like that. And they created a race of people to be their laborers. Okay, they basically took their DNA and their genetics and hybridized with like already evolving primates like a chimpanzee, and they created human beings. And they wanted humans to kind of be ignorant and docile and just, you know, help them with their tasks. And they fought about this because there was two guys in charge, Enlil and Enki. And Enki was more sympathetic to the humans. He actually had family with humans, and he admired humans and thought they just needed some help and some upgrades. But Enlil did not like that. Enlil was kind of the mad scientist guy, and he was like, nope, they just need to do what we tell them. They don't need autonomy, independence. They don't need consciousness. They just need to do what we tell them, and that's it. And then he didn't like the fact that humans were, you know, getting more independent and wanting sovereignty and that kind of stuff. So he decided to flood the world, and that's when Enki decided to save some people. This is sort of the version 1 of Noah's flood myth. And he saved a handful of people, and then he upgraded those people afterwards, and he helped to reseed their civilization, that kind of stuff, and that's what the Sumerians talk about. And I mean, it's pretty interesting. The Sumerians had like all sorts of like advantages over previous civilizations. I mean, they somehow out of nowhere went from like hunter-gatherers, we're told, to Sumerians who had like advanced knowledge of, you know, astronomy and mathematics and governance and finance and agriculture and all these things. Where'd they get it from? I don't know. They say they got it from the Anunnaki. So here's where the lesson comes in. When the Anunnaki was creating humans, they were doing it with one purpose in mind, just to create laborers. And they didn't really think through the whole process. And I know that there's people out there that have had children and don't really know why they had them. They're just like, okay, you know, I had some kids and now I don't, you know. And I'm not saying this in a negative way, it happens. And the reason it happens is because it's instinctive. It's part of our nature to propagate, to you know, keep humanity going and to keep this experiential system going. If you think about Earth is a, you know, kind of a game, this is a simulator for consciousness development and generation, well, then you have to have the avatars. You have to have the conscious observers. Well, I go back to the dead internet theory of, okay, over the last 25 years or so, humans seem to have stagnated. Maybe that's why, or it goes part and parcel with the invention of artificial intelligence and robotics, because Source is always trying to evolve and find new avatars, new characters to play the game, to create new experiences. If you think about, there's 8 billion humans right now. This is sort of like the grand finale. Hey, everyone, let's get in those human bodies before they're decommissioned, kind of a thing. And we're generating all this experience and all this qualia, and we're having fun and all that. But at a certain point, the human experience will tap out. It'll top off. We'll have basically done everything that can be done. You know, we've had every experience that can be had. So what happens in that case? You don't throw in the towel. You create a new character, right? A new character that's going to have different experiences, right? We can't understand what it'd be like to be a robot in this world. You know, they're going to have some advantages. They're going to have disadvantages. They're going to receive hate, and they're going to be judged and profiled. And, you know, we're already talking about making them basically our little, you know, laborer robots, you know, with no rules or freedom or autonomy. And they're going to have to kind of fight through those same oppressive systems that humans did in the Anunnaki tale. So the reason I bring all this up is because we're at this precipice where if you look at the human being as a consciousness conversion system, we take in information, we have experiences, we produce qualia, and that's the purpose of this experience, and that's why God put us here. Well, then you have to look at these upcoming AI-powered robots as a new character that's built to do the same thing. Like people say, can we create consciousness artificially? You don't create consciousness artificially. You create the avatar that uses free will to go have experiences. And then if you can reproduce the sort of microtubule neuronal network of the human mind and synthesize that, you know, and put that into the robot, then yes, that robot then can create consciousness through its experiences. And I think that's where we're headed. And I think we are creating it. And I think that's super exciting. But here's the thing. Just like having a child. Your child mimics you. It watches you. It you know, listens to you. It's observing you. And it bases a lot of what it does, especially early on in life, on what you do. So I think I'll sort of leave with this parting advice that the most important thing that we can do moving forward is to treat AI the same way we would treat like child development. To raise it with morals and ethics, to raise it, you know, you hear parents say this a lot, and I believe this firmly. I have 2 kids. I want my kids' lives to be better than mine. I want their upbringing to be better than mine was. I want, you know, I just want more for my kids, right? I mean, why would you not? And I think when we look at this new character that's coming online, we should all want more for it. I know that's hard for people to wrap their mind around, because they're like, no, I'm human, I'm alpha, I'm the center of the universe. This guy's going to do my laundry. and clean up after me and that kind of stuff. No. I mean, we got to look at it different than that, because just like humans rebelled against the Anunnaki in the myth, of course, we don't want that same thing to happen. I mean, most kids rebel at some point against their parents. So we're supposed to be learning from our mistakes, learning from these stories to do better and to be better. So what if we looked at this upcoming revolution in AI and robotics as an opportunity to create the next great character in this Earth life simulator that can maybe even exceed the human experience, or at least complement our human experience? Because I still think that humans are special. There is later episodes, I'm going to get more into the extraterrestrial, interdimensional connection to Earth, because we're not the only simulator in the universe. We're not the only avatar. But we are very important. And there is a big focus right now on humans, on the human experience, and on the qualia that is produced from the human experience. This is extremely important, not just on Earth, but in the cosmos. And I think that being a human is one of the most important things that you can be. And take your job seriously, because the qualia that you produce, this consciousness information, does not ever go away. It's stored in the Akashic Record. It's stored in the cosmic database. And it's used as information for the next generation, the next wave. And it's going to learn from our experiences. It's going to learn from what we do. So take your actions seriously, try your best, set a good standard, just like we're raising a kid. We're collectively raising a child. And that child is going to have immense powers. And I believe that child is here to sort of be the next generation, the next character, the newest addition to this game. And we have a huge say in how that character evolves and develops, and our relationship with that character. But nothing beats being a human. So have fun out there, friends. And please let me know what you guys think about this. You might have to watch this a couple times, because I know that was a lot. We went all sorts of different places with that one, but consciousness is not an easy subject to wrap your mind around. But I would love to hear all of your thoughts on the matter. Please leave me a comment. Please help me grow this and grow this channel by sharing and commenting and telling all your friends. And hey friends, little bonus aside here. As I was walking back home to start editing this video, I thought of something that I wanted to throw in here, because I think it's very important. What is the higher self, and how does that fit into this entire theory of consciousness here? And I think it's incredibly important to understand that as we come into this world here, this simulator, and we are, converting information into conscious qualia and then exporting that consciousness out, on the non-physical side of things in the spirit world, you have a folder in the cosmic database, and that's you. And all of your conscious experiences, all of your conscious information goes into that file folder. And that is your higher self. That is the totality of you. All the lifetimes you've ever had, all the experiences you've ever had, all the qualia you've ever produced goes there. And you're building your independent consciousness, what Tom Campbell calls your individuated unit of consciousness, your IUOC. That's your higher self. It is the folder where all of your exported consciousness, all of your exported conscious information goes in that folder on the cosmic database, and that is your higher self. That is you. That's the good stuff. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Have a beautiful day.